Like, don't be vague, but hint at things. But, like, don't explain things, you know what I mean?
Don't be
like,
vague, be mysterious.
Yeah, but not too mysterious.
It sounds like we're giving bad dating advice.
I know. Amazing. Welcome to the Plotcast. I'm your host, Char from the Plottery. I'll help you plant little but mighty seeds of motivation so you can watch your ideas grow into beautiful, beautiful novels. Welcome back to the Plotcast. I'm here with Yasmina.
Howdy.
Howdy. Today we are going to tackle the topic of first chapters. Yeah, intense.
Because you had that recent post about it, which...
Recent post about it. I feel like I post about first chapters like every other week.
That's because they're so daunting. It's that whole blank page thing. Like, I'm not saying it's easy once you get started on a book. The whole thing is not necessarily a slog, but motivation, like maintaining motivation is hard. But that first chapter is like, how do I start somewhere intriguing enough to grip my reader? And I think it's the chapter you're most likely to keep self-editing on, and it just becomes this vicious cycle of doing it over and over again.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think first chapters there's just a lot of pressure on first chapters in general, because like online all you hear about is like your first chapter needs to do this and it needs to not do this and it needs to be perfect and it needs to hook the reader and grab the attention and whatever.
Yeah.
And for new writers, I think that can be a little bit overwhelming when you see that.
Yeah. Especially if you're thinking of applying to agents. And then once you like build momentum with the book, it's easier to set aside the fact that you can come back and edit it and not get caught up in the perfection. But there's something about like that first sentence you just want it to be stunning. Which it rarely is the first time.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think, well, I'm doing my second draft of the current project that I'm working on, and I'm very happy with the first line. But again, it is a second draft. So the first one,
Yeah.
I don't actually think did I have a first chapter in my first draft? I don't know if I even
Just
did.
bypass this problem entirely.
Yeah, exactly. I do think, like, hot tip, if you're scared of writing the first chapter, just don't. Just leave it. Just leave it. Come back to it in the second draft. It's fine.
See, I'm like the opposite. I'm like, even if it's absolute garbage, just write it, because you can't edit a blank page, but you can edit garbage.
I love your take on that. Yeah. You can edit garbage. Yeah, no, totally. I think the first draft that I wrote for this project was mostly just like all over the place. So like I was doing that amazing thing where you jump from chapter to chapter and you don't actually like, yeah.
My soul just left my body.
I know. I had to do that though, because now I know that I will never, ever do that again, because that was a horrible experience. So
it makes your developmental edit brutal if you do that, because you get a lot of continuity problems.
And this is exactly why I'm now doing a second draft completely from scratch. So
yeah, and I was talking to a client yesterday even who that was why he wanted to work on writing coaching together, because he's like, I just want to avoid that horrific developmental edit I had with my first book, which I didn't work on him with him on. The energy drink has not kicked in, clearly.
we get it. It's okay.
Yeah.
You're an editor. You understand words.
Yeah, I edit on the page. I don't edit as I ramble.
That's fair enough. I do feel like, I know this is so off track, but I do feel like it's such a common thing for authors not to be eloquent when they speak to other people.
Oh, yeah. Especially once the ADHD kicks in, I'm just like, let me go on a tangent, which is basically the whole point of a podcast, to go on a tangent. So,
yeah. Well, at least you're in the right space for it.
Yeah.
But anyway, we can jump into the actual topic and talk about what your first chapter should definitely have. So I think for me, the number one thing that I always tell everyone, your first chapter, whether it is a first chapter or it's like a prologue or a hint or whatever, it should still have internal conflict. Like, no matter what you're writing about, there has to be some kind of connection to the character. Ideally, internal conflict, or, something that they're going to resolve by the end of the book. A little hint, a little
intrigue, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that was something that I always include. I think there's a misconception that you have to have the inciting incident in the first chapter, which I don't agree with, but you definitely need to set up the sort of what's lacking in the character's life, what internally do they need that they don't necessarily realize they need yet, but will be resolved throughout the course of the book or the series if you're writing a series.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with. I think that's a really good point to clear up is you absolutely do not have to have your inciting incident in the first chapter. Like, no. I think most of
Yeah.
the coaching clients that I've worked with, I usually always tell them, your first chapter is really about the character and about setting up that situation that's sort of sticky and whatever. And then you can use the second chapter to, set up the plot stuff because that's what's going to kick them into gear and into changing and stuff. But yeah, the first one, I think definitely take your time to actually make your reader care about the character first before you do something to them to shake them up. Because we need to know what we're shaking up before we shake it up.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like status quo, then inciting incident,
Yeah.
then it all like goes to hell.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the character, for me at least, I like character driven stuff. So establishing a strong sense of the character is so important in the first chapter because that's what I'll get attached to. And I think long term for any reader, even if you enjoy a plot driven book, very rarely do I hear people go like, oh, that was an excellent plot or
Yeah.
something like that. They'll be like, I really related to the character or I really like the prose. And I think so establishing things like tone and your character are much more important in the first chapter.
And now that you're actually mentioning the writing and the tone, I think it's goes kind of hand in hand to establish character voice also, like a narrative voice.
Yeah. Especially if it's in first person, you should take the time to consider how that character's voice differs from, say, like an omniscient third person where it doesn't need to necessarily have as strong a tone, but if you're inside a character's head in first person, it should have some distinction from like casual chat, maybe.
Yeah, like a
Yeah.
casual detached narrator is not gonna. Well, it can be if you work on the voice. I do think omniscient narrators, you should use a very strong voice for them as well, but that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah. To be fair, I don't write in third person very much, so you're probably better authority on that.
I think, well, okay, I think what you said about first person kind of applies to third person focalized, like the close perspective when you use third person.
Yeah.
Because they are pretty, like, interchangeable, I think, the first and third close. You could do either that you wanted to. I think it's just about what level of distance you're looking for in your character. First person is inevitably going to be a lot closer, while third person you're putting a little bit of distance, so you can still get into the character's head and do kind of the same thing that you would in first person. It would just read a little bit differently, and I do think in third person close you do get a little bit of space to not have to go that hard on character voice, but I still think you should. I'm very like, when it comes to narrative, when it comes to close narrative perspectives, you have to have like a really, really strong narrator that grabs the attention of your reader and hopefully gets like a little bit of connection going there. I think that's very important for the first chapter, just establish connection with the reader.
Even in the first line, that is often something I try. I think so. Say, for example, in the book of mine that you've read, Becoming Dangerous, and Adra, who has like quite, I like to think, has like a very strong voice, and her first line is like something along the lines of like, "Who the fuck brings cupcakes to a coven gathering?"
Oh yeah.
And it's just like it gives you a really clear insight into who she is. I think even from that first line, as someone who's quite sassy and a little bit of female rage there, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. It does set up her character really nicely. The book that I'm what was my first line in? Oh, I think it's dialogue. I think I might change that. In Statue of a Woman, it's dialogue. I'm not 100% on the first chapter just yet. But in the one that I'm working on right now, I'm actually very happy with the first chapter. And the first line is also quite indicative of the character, and I'm very proud of that. But the first line is, Liam was 37 minutes late. And it's really like, to me, it paints like the character, because the character is very obsessed, first of all, with Liam, and you can kind of hear that in the counting of the minutes, like by the, it's almost
Yeah.
like he could even look at the seconds, I think, but
And
I'm
also
not
the
going to
fact
take it that deep.
that he talks immediately about Liam
Someone else.
prioritizing him over himself.
Exactly. And that is
Yeah.
literally the point of the whole book, is like,
Yeah.
you need to start thinking about yourself first.
Yeah.
Um,
That reminds me of the book I'm writing right now. Literally the first line is forgive me any acts of self-erasure. This story was always more hers than mine anyway. And he's
aw.
going through like the same journey. It's prioritize, like he always prioritizes her and puts her on a pedestal. And the book, he's kind of realizing that he shouldn't do that. So look at us with our similar little
Aw.
obsessive boys.
I love obsessive boys. I do love
Yeah.
obsessive boys. Okay. Well, we've talked a little bit about the first line, actually, which is great.
Yeah.
Well, what
What's
else?
Well, I was gonna say for the first line, if we're gonna sum that up, I think
Mm-hmm.
my like main piece of advice, because the first line is something I work on with every client,
Mm-hmm.
kind of in specific detail, and like the main thing I tell them is it should always open up a question that the reader has to keep reading to get the answer to. And I noted down one of my favorite examples, which is from or actually there are two. There's one from the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, I think, that's let's start with the end of the world, shall we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And you're
I
just
love
like,
that.
okay, what? And the other one, which is less obviously good, is on the second Sabbath of 12th moon in the city of Weep, a girl fell from the sky. And I like that because it like really immerses you in the world building with particular details. Like it's not vague at all. And it just gets its hooks into you. You're like, why is someone falling from the sky? Who is she? What's gonna happen to her? And yeah, I really like that one a lot.
To connect to what you said, you mentioned vague, and I think that's something not to do. Like,
Yes.
being vague in your first chapter, trying to be a little bit too mysterious, it really can throw the reader off, because you have no idea what you're reading. And when you do open a book, you want them to be very, like, you want a very clear image in their head, whether it's a visual image or it's character voice, somebody telling you something or trying to prove you a point or something like that. It needs to be very clear. I think vagueness, it gets your point lost, and you cannot, like, putting pretty poetic language and all of that is fine, but you need to establish where we are first and what's going on and why we should care about that. So
Yeah, I think there's a big penchant to open sometimes with these like broad generalizations about life that probably long term have something to do with the story, but they don't always get well executed. I mean, I know Jane Austen did it well with the whole a man with a fortune will be in want of a wife, and that worked really well. But a lot of the time it just doesn't really get its hooks into the reader. And I was going to say something else about vagueness, but now my little brain has lost it. Yeah, I think those poetic lines, while they can sound beautiful, that's a matter of killing your darlings, where you just shouldn't get too attached to those. Oh, and what I was going to say, which is more specific to fantasy and vagueness, as I do a lot of fantasy, is the info dumping, but there's the reverse of it, where people will pepper in all these terms for their world building without explaining them, or they'll have too many that they do explain, and it just gets really confusing in an opening chapter. So in the first chapter, be gentle with the world building if you're doing fantasy. Yeah, don't have too much of it.
yeah, lull your reader into it, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really need to find a certain balance when it comes to exposition versus info dumping. You know what I mean? Like, you want to have
Yeah.
exposition, you want to have a little bit of context on whatever's going on, but it needs to be relevant for the moment, I think.
Yeah. Like, does your reader need to know this right now? And I completely understand when you've put a lot of effort into world building. You're like, I want to share this with my reader. I'm so proud of it because, yeah, I write fantasy and I feel the same. But just, I think every time you introduce part of your world building, take a moment to be like, does this benefit the reader right now, or is it just adding information they don't need?
Yeah. I think, honestly, the best rule of thumb is just to tell us things when and if they become relevant.
Yeah.
And if they don't, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Create a need for that information then in your plot. Maybe. Yeah.
Okay, what else do you think a first chapter needs to have?
I guess to kind of broaden on the whole first line posing question is just that whole, and we've kind of touched on it, that whole first chapter should pose like quite a few questions about the character, the world they're in. If it's fantasy, sorry, I'm always gonna sort of talk in reference to fantasy. Like you want to establish mystery and intrigue, which kind of sounds like we're contradicting your point about not being vague, but you have to do it without being vague, basically. Like give your reader as much detail and as possible that's relevant, while still creating mystery and creating questions that they need the answer to get them beyond the first chapter.
I think the mystery aspect, it comes in not from the way that you write, like how you write your prose, because obviously you want to be clear on, I don't know, the character is currently burying a dead body or whatever. We want to know that. You're not going to dance around the subject of like, there's dirt under his nails and the clinking of a shovel or whatever. Like, you're not going to give us these ominous little bits and pieces. I'm maybe actually talking about this too clearly, but like I've read scenes that have been like really gripping situations, but the way that the author described them, I didn't realize what the character was actually doing until like the end of the page or something. So you want to be clear in how you describe things, but maybe leave questions for interpretation in terms of what you're actually describing. So for example, if the character is burying a body, you don't have to tell us why. You don't have to tell us whether they killed him. You don't have to tell us who it is. You can sprinkle those details in a little bit later, or like leave those questions lingering in their head. But tell us what the hell they're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because if you get, like you said, if you're caught up for a whole page of trying to figure out what's going on, you're going to miss a lot of the nuance. You're going to miss the language. You're not going to be paying attention to details about the character. You're really just trying to put the the basic puzzle pieces of what's happening together, and that distracts the reader from all the other hard work you're doing.
Yeah. It makes sense to me. It is a very like nuanced issue though. Like, how do you explain to someone, be vague, but don't be vague, but hint at things. But like, don't explain things. You know what I mean?
Don't be
like,
vague, be mysterious.
Yeah, but not too mysterious.
It sounds like we're giving bad dating advice.
I know. Amazing. Okay. Yes. So I do think first chapter, just to summarize, you should do a lot of character work, voice work, tone work, and definitely make sure that you are setting up a question for your novel. So whatever the hell is going to be happening throughout the entire novel, the first chapter really should be the thing that sets us up to the character who is going to be tackling that story. Again, you don't have to worry too much about the plot, but I would think about, what is the theme that's going to get resolved? What is the internal conflict? What's your character going to be going through? Because that's a really good... It's not a really good place to hint at it. It's where you should hint at it, really, in the first chapter. So
maybe talk about, like, misconceptions about things you need to include in the first chapter. Because, like you were saying, there are a lot of articles that say, and I know we've just made a list of things you should include, there are a lot of lists that are like, this is what you have to include. What are sort of some misconceptions of things you need in the first chapter?
Okay, well, I think we've mentioned the inciting incident, so you definitely don't need that. World building, again, we've mentioned that. You don't need to dump the context of what world we're in, or what fantasy sort of, I don't know, what magic system.
Or like what the political situation is.
Exactly, yeah, like that's all stuff that you can sprinkle in throughout the story.
Further to sort of like a more general info dumping problem, you don't need the character's whole backstory in the first chapter.
that was literally what I was going to say.
I'm just a telepath, a long-distance telepath.
Yeah.
Because info dumping doesn't need to exclusively apply to world building. It can apply to other things as well. And you don't need to introduce every single character that's going to play a role in the book.
Yeah, oh my god. Well, we say that, but you should look at my first chapter.
Well, yeah, but your
I
first
told
chapter
you,
is a party, isn't it?
it's literally, so it's 6,000 words though. I'm very happy with that because I thought it was going to be a lot longer. But it's okay because like my usual chapters are around 5,000. So I'm like, okay, I can probably edit this down in the next draft a little bit. But yes, my first chapter is a party sort of thing. It's definitely an exception to that rule, I guess, of like,
Yeah.
you don't
I'm
have
not
to.
saying you can't do it. I'm just saying you don't need to.
You don't need to,
Yeah.
no. But I think the reason I did it was because the whole point of the chapter was to establish how nobody cares about the protagonist, but they all care about Liam. It was very
Including
sad.
the protagonist.
Including the protagonist. Yeah. So, but yeah, if you, again, I think maybe it's important to note now that whatever rules we state in this podcast is like there are exceptions to them. So like if you have a purpose for breaking any of those rules, then do it. But again, that's the key word, purpose. Are you doing it on purpose? Do you have a reason as to why you're breaking an advice that somebody tells you, or are you just doing it because because you wanna
Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, to go back to backstory, definitely you shouldn't give us the character's whole backstory because then that kind of ruins, I think, the intrigue of figuring them out slowly.
Yeah.
And I like to always think about like a couple of backstory points, or scenes almost that I'm gonna keep for later reveals. So like I know what happens, but and it's very important to the story, but you need to find the right moment to reveal it. For backstory moments, and I usually do that with most of my characters, just so that there are questions still throughout the whole book until you reveal that.
And also, a lot of those reveals are usually things that will have more impact once we've developed an attachment to the character through the course of the book. So if you reveal something dramatic or traumatic in the opening chapter, we don't really care about the character enough yet for it to be as impactful as it will be maybe midway through the book.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, again, that brings us back to just try to build up those questions about the character, and you will need to find the right points of when to reveal them.
Yeah, and plotting will help do that.
Plotting will help, but also revisions, I think, help so much in finding the right spots to do your, because I think a lot of mine, when I do like second drafts or third drafts, I do move things around a lot, and I'm like, oh, I think this context of this backstory would maybe fit better earlier on or later on or something like that. Usually it's always later on.
Yeah. See, I am like such an aggressive plotter, and also at this point I've written 29 books
Jesus Christ.
that I do nothing with. So I've like got a really solid method for plotting that means I usually I usually don't end up doing major developmental revisions because I do these intense chapter outlines, and and I'm constantly going back to the chapter outline after like writing every chapter and thinking if I need to add anything to any of the other chapters because I hate developmentally editing my own book. It's my worst nightmare, so I'm like anything to avoid it.
Yeah, I'm going through that right now. I'm still procrastinating on my third revision for Statue of a Woman, so
Yeah.
Maybe I'll...
That laugh, just like the horrors are endless.
Yeah, they are. Okay, our top pointers for writing a killer first chapter. What are your... I mean, I guess this will just be a summary because I feel like we've given some really decent pointers so far.
Yeah, I think the one my top pointer probably goes back to that, like the posing the question even in the first line thing. That is honestly the piece of advice that ends up going to every single manuscript I edit. I actually have like a little paragraph about two paragraphs about how to write a first line that I'll like copy and paste into the manuscript and then give like personalized advice based on the first line they've written. But just to give general idea of how to write a first line, because one thing that I always get feedback on with my books is that I write
Good first
good first
lines.
lines. Yeah.
You
So
do.
like, I think I know what I'm doing. Thank you.
You definitely do. See, I don't pay that much attention to first lines. I don't know why. Like when I start editing or reading a manuscript, I'm just like, yeah, whatever. I'm reading it now.
Yeah.
I don't really dwell on it that much, but I have been thinking about it a lot more recently. I am also on the, it's maybe not the other spectrum, but I also think it's maybe okay not to put that much pressure on your first line and just start it, and you might get a better idea later.
Oh, I think, yeah, for a first draft, you don't need to be that stressed about it. I think the reason I prioritize it is because whenever I'm in a bookshop and I look at a book, I will read the first line. Always, as well as the blurb on the back. And I'm not saying it's make or break for me whether I buy that book based on the first line, but it can make a big difference in whether I pick it up.
Yeah. Well, I do think, I think for me, it's never really about whether the first line shocks me. It's more about whether the voice of the author grabs me.
Yeah. No, I don't need to be shocked, but I need to be intrigued.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like just looking at the first page when you are looking at, you're at the bookstore and you're looking what you want to buy. I think the skimming the first page, for me, it's always like, am I going to enjoy the way that this is written?
Yeah.
So yeah, it does have a lot to do with style as well, but that's another topic, I think. Hello, listener. It's time for us to judge a book by its cover. Have we got what it takes to uncover the true story without looking at its pages? Well, let's find out. So the cover that we're going to be judging today is When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker.
I've read this book.
Oh no, Yasmina.
I got an arc of it from the publisher, so I read it like before it came out. I think there's like a little tower castle in the corner.
Yeah, I see that.
Having read the book, I have no clue what that tower castle is referring to.
Oh.
No, I haven't the faintest idea what bearing that has on the story.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't think this cover expresses much about the book, except that there's like sort of a weird geometric looking dragon in the corner, and the book has dragons in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was my only clue anyway. I thought, the book is gonna have a dragon in it, and
yeah,
it gives me a bit of a fairy tale vibe or something. But you know what that reminds me of is, have you heard of the book The God Killer?
Yes, because the cover artist for that did the cover of my self-published book.
Oh, really?
He's a friend of mine. Yeah.
So, fun fact, I actually heard this from L.R. Lamb. So, they told me basically, I think her name is Hannah
Hannah Kaner.
So, Hannah wrote this book, The God Killer, and it has like a massive deer on the cover.
Stag. And it's a beautiful cover.
It's a gorgeous cover. And so when she got it, she was like, this is amazing, but there is no deer in this book. So I think what she did actually is she went back in like one of her edits and she actually added in like a stag somewhere in the novel so that there would be a connection, with the book cover and the actual book. So, I mean, yeah, sometimes publishers don't really pay attention to those things. So.
Yeah, I have a friend who I won't like disclose the author or the publisher because this was not supposed to be out, and she just told me this yesterday. She had received the cover art for the sequel to her book and was very happy with it. And it suited the book perfectly. And the publisher was just like, we don't like it. And they're not telling her what the new cover art's going to be at all. And they were like, don't talk to the artist. You're not allowed to talk to the artist.
Oh my God.
And so she has no clue what's going on now with the cover of her book. Yeah, so truly don't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah. Despite the name of this section, which is judge a book by its cover, so
yeah. Well, in a bookstore, just make sure you read that blurb.
Read the blurb. So anyway, I'm gonna take a wild guess, since we might as well just do this as a segment anyway. Even though you read it, When the Moon Hatched. I really like the title.
And the like world building behind the title is excellent as well. I gave this book 4 stars, which if you know me,
Oh,
I'm very
wow.
critical. So
Wow.
yeah.
Okay, that's good. So I'm gonna say there's a dragon in it.
No.
I'm gonna say there's a dragon
Ponies.
in it, and it is very like celestial. Like I really
Mhm.
like the sort of fairy tale sort of. It's very like stars and sparkles and whatever. So it does give me vibes of like um when the moon hatched. I don't know, because dragons hatch from eggs, don't they? So I thought maybe that has something to do with the the lore,
Yes.
the lore
Yeah.
of the world or whatever. Um, Maybe the moon is the dragon. Oh my god, I don't know. Maybe that's his name.
Do you want spoilers? Do you want
Yes.
spoilers? Well, so there are 3 types of dragons first of all, and one is called a moon plume. But what happened in the lore is the dragons flew into the sky and like atrophied into moons. And the end of the prologue is like it had been how many ever years when one of the moons fell.
Oh, that's so
Yeah.
cool. I got chills. I love that. Okay. Well,
It is a really good book, and the world building's excellent.
we can read the blurb. Magic, dragons, romance, the fantasy phenomenon of the year. He's fire and brimstone. I'm shattered ice. Oh, it's written in first person. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll gladly burn beneath him until the world comes crumbling down. As an assassin for the rebellion, Rave's job is to complete orders and never get caught. When a rival bounty hunter shatters her world, Rave finds herself captured by the Guild of Nobles, a group of powerful fae. Crushed by the loss of his great love, dragon rider Con Vigor took the head of a king and donned his melted crown. And now on a tireless quest to quell the never-ebbing ache in his chest, a clue lures him into the capital's high-security prison where he stumbles upon the imprisoned Rave. Together, they seek truths that threaten to unravel everything they knew about their world and each other. Best-selling sensation When the Moon Hatched will transport you into a world filled with magic, dragons, and a love that blazes through the ages.
Through the edges of what?
I wish I knew how to read.
I am actually illiterate, unfortunately.
Yeah, a little bit. Hey, listener, we're about to answer some audience questions. Did you know you could submit questions every month to be answered right here on the Plotcast? You can do this by following my Instagram account at @Plottery and keeping an eye on my end-of-month Q&A boxes in my Instagram stories. Make sure to submit a good one, and we might answer it on the next episode. All right, let's get back into it. For our listener questions, we are going to answer 2 of them today. So the first is by, and here's me pronouncing usernames again, Isla McGinley. Actually, this is a name, so this is good. And they're asking, how do you use synonyms for said without being repetitive? I have a very opinionated opinion on this.
Well, then I'm gonna let you go first.
Okay. Well, first of all, oh, I see God Killer there on your bookshelf, actually.
Yeah. Yes.
What was I gonna say? Right, the said thing. Actually, I think utilize action tags more than speech tags, because I think that really clears up so many issues with repetition and redundant words. First of all, because like if you have, okay, for example, I see this a lot and I edit for this constantly, but say you have a line of dialogue, blah 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 blah, he said, full stop, then he walked over to the blah 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 blah. Get rid of the he said and just use the action tag. You know what I mean? And then we know who's speaking, who's saying what. And unless it is said in a very specific way, so like he shouted or he whispered or something that's like very, you know, you need to kind of get that to get the intonation of the dialogue, then you don't need like a speech tag to clarify. You just go for an action tag. I'm a very avid action tag lover, if that's a
thing. Don't come between Char and her action tags.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. The only other time I think speech tags can be useful is if you have more than 2 people in a conversation, to make sure it's clear who's speaking. But yeah, if I notice a client is using a speech tag every single line of dialogue and it's only 2 characters,
Oh my
I
God,
will edit
yeah.
for that.
Absolutely.
And I think some people tend to overthink using a variety of
Oh my
words
God.
for speech tags, and they end up using ones that don't really make
Uh-huh.
sense. Um, so one example is like, "Hey, how's it going?" Someone will like cry that out or
He
call that out to
cried,
their
yeah.
friend, but it will be like he bellowed or he screamed, and I'm like, if someone said, "Hey, if someone bellowed, "Hey, how are you doing?" to me up the street, I am legging it away. That is terrifying. So yeah, just make sure that if you're using a speech tag, it is sort of purposeful and it
Uh-huh.
actually adds to the intonation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he grunted, he chortled,
Mm-hmm.
or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also something, if you know you have an issue with using he said over again, dedicate like an edit to it. Don't overthink it while you're writing,
Mm.
but go back and edit for where you maybe don't need speech tags or where you can change the verb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like what you said about like just two-way conversations. I think that's really important. Like, and that goes back to actually character voices and stuff. But I think if you establish the first speaker and we know who's in the scene, you can sort of, if your voices are strong enough, theoretically, I'm not saying that you should do this, but theoretically, if you wanted to, you could probably have dialogue for like 5 pages without speech text or any indications of who's
Yeah.
speaking, and you can probably tell who's saying what.
Yeah.
Again, don't do that unless it's for a purpose. But if
As
you,
a writing
it's a good
exercise to
writing
develop a
exercise.
character voice, yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
one.
exactly. I actually do that constantly when I draft my scenes, and then I will send literally just dialogue with no context to Barry, so that she can read over it, and I literally never have to specify who's saying what. She just knows.
I think we should get Barry a new Halo,
We
to be
really,
honest. Barry's an angel.
yeah, yeah. um, okay, right. So that's that on said. And then the second question that we have is from Alex Bulger, I think. How to make describing places less tedious. I never enjoy that part. Descriptions of places bore me.
Okay. Yeah. I was talking to a client about this recently, and I think the best way to incorporate setting is to incorporate it in the action. So like the character picks something up or goes and sits in like a chair or something. Please never just have a paragraph where you're like, and the wallpaper was yellow damask, and there was a green leather Queen Anne chair. It's just like, do we need to know it's a Queen Anne chair? Like, just say it's like a leather chair. But also, yeah, you do need details of setting because white room syndrome is a thing, and it makes the characters feel like they're just floating in some cloudy white plane and having a conversation. But trying to weave it throughout the scene, through the action, as opposed to just listing. In the same way that if you're describing a character, you would say, like, he ran his fingers through his brown hair or something like that in order to describe what he looks like instead of saying
His hair was
the
brown.
colors. Yeah, as soon as he enters the scene. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I think I have a rule of thumb, I guess, or like a little method that I do when, or that I tell my clients when they are struggling with this sort of thing. But that's in order to sort of avoid white room syndrome. What you do is at the beginning of every scene, somewhere at the beginning, you want to establish where we are. So literally just like at the beginning of the scene, give us enough details so that we know where we are. Because if you say, I don't know, we're in a coffee shop or whatever, like your reader can pretty easily fill in the blanks of a coffee shop, and it'll probably
Yeah.
be something like a coffee shop that they've been to, whatever. And you can give us a little bit of detail, like sensory stuff about, like, I don't know, maybe there's a coffee machine that's like a little too loud, or like a
The smell of
woman,
baked goods that are
smell of
displayed
baked
by the
goods,
counter.
exactly,
Yeah.
a woman laughing in the corner or something like that. So little details like that, just to paint the scene. You don't have to go overboard.
Mm-hmm.
And then throughout the actual scene, focus on props that your characters are
Yeah.
interacting with. So like if they sit down at a table, if they get a coffee, if they get they're toying with the menu or something like that. But like that's just one way to sort of keep your setting alive, and avoid having the white room syndrome, but without having to necessarily dive into descriptions if that's not your thing. But also, I think it's important to note that if you are bored writing descriptions, then those descriptions are probably boring. Because no, I'm serious. Because you are probably doing them.
Right. Yeah.
Because you're probably only writing them because you think, oh, I need to have a description here. And I think one thing to look out that you're not doing is resorting to. You kind of mentioned this, but it's like when you enter a room and then you have the author just lists like everything that's in the room, or how the room looks, or like how it's built architecturally or whatever. We don't need that. Like, just give us the context of what the room is. Is it a living room? Is there a couch in it? That's enough.
Yeah.
You can get like a little bit more detailed if you want to, but again, don't like overload it. And if you find yourself getting bored with it, then why would the readers care for it? So, yeah. Anyway, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so. Like, I like a good room description because, as you know, I really like interior decorating.
Yeah.
So I enjoy going a little ham on my room descriptions, but I haven't been told they're boring yet. But I never just sit and list. It will be like maybe in the opening few sentences of a chapter or in a new scene, the character might note like the most prominent feature or the most unique feature of the room or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So you can always take the beginning of a scene to just paint like a bit of a picture of where we are, and then use the rest of the scene for any other details that you might want. I think it's also, it works kind of similarly with character descriptions, like how you wouldn't like describe a character's eyes from
you wouldn't be like
across the room,
like
across the room. But when you get closer to him, or when you are in that context, in that space. So for example, like I walk into your room, I might not be able to read the titles on your bookshelf immediately, but if I go closer,
from the camera, you did from the camera, so
but like if I got closer to it, I could be like, oh look, there's Godkiller there.
maybe your character does actually, it's like a character quirk that they catalog that like their surroundings when they walk in, but for the most part when I walk into a room, I'm not just like,
there's this and there's that and there's this. Yeah, exactly. I like that.
Unless, I'm trying to rob the place and then I'm making an inventory of everything in there.
And I think just one more last important note is that you always need to think from the head of your narrative character, so who it is that's describing things. I like what you said about like if that is their personality trait, they might be able to scan a bookshelf and read all the titles and whatever. Like my character Marcel in Statue of a Woman, he has like a scene where he's actually looking at a bookshelf while he's having a really emotional scene with Jamie, and Jamie says I love you for the first time, but what Marcel's doing in the meantime is scanning the bookshelf, and he finds that one of the two of the books are like out of order alphabetically. And that's like the thing he focuses on. So
because he's avoidant of the emotion.
He's avoidant of the emotion, and he also has like OCD or whatever. But
like I have a character who is really into fashion, and she'll always, it's in a multiple POV book, she'll often describe what another character is wearing, whereas like none of the other characters
care for
from
that.
Their POVs really give a crap.
Yeah, exactly. So be in your character's head and try to think about what they would actually describe rather than you, and rather than what you think you need to describe. I hope that helps. I think we'll leave off the episode here, and yeah, we'll talk to you in the next one.
Looking forward to it.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Plotcast. If you want more writing tips and tricks, head over to my YouTube channel. Until next time.